Okay, welcome to the session on official statistics. This is from the methods section of the course and is examined on paper 1 and paper 3. So this is the contents of today's session. We're going to have an intro to official statistics. We're going to do our PET as normal, practical, ethical, theoretical, strengths and limitations. We're going to discuss whether it's a positivist or an interpretivist method, and then we're going to finish off looking at some possible exam questions. Okay, now before we look at official statistics in any detail, we need to understand what a secondary source is. So a secondary source, as it says here, is information and data which has already been produced or collected by someone else. So if you watch a news report, if you read a newspaper, if you read a book, you are accessing a secondary source of data. So a primary source of data is when you, as the sociologist, go and collect the data yourself. Now, everything that you've looked at so far has been a primary source of data. Carrying out questionnaires, carrying out interviews, those are primary sources where you, as the sociologist, are creating the data. Secondary sources are when somebody else has collected the data for you. And official statistics are secondary sources of data. Now, how does this work? Well, there is a primary method. The primary method is a questionnaire, interviews, could be a lab or field experiment. It might be data collection by a school, data collection by the police or the justice system. There's many different ways that data is collated and that primary method happens within society. What happens then is that data is passed on and collected by the government. So if we think here about attendance data at schools, so we have to send that data to the government. We have to tell the government what percentage of our students are attending our school. And so that data then becomes official statistics, OS. And the government has huge amounts of this data from all different parts of society. The actual method, what we as sociologists are going to do, is we are then going to analyse that data. So we are going to look at attendance data. We are going to look at GCSE grades. We are going to look at crime rates. And we are going to come up with our own theories and our own beliefs about that data. So the method that the sociologist is doing is that last stage there, the analysis. The government is the one who collects together all of that data. Let's have a look at some of the examples of the type of things that the government collects. Well, the first thing that you need to know is there is a government body which is in charge of this, and it's called the Office for National Statistics. It's absolutely fine in your exams to write ONS. Everybody knows what the ONS is. The Office for National Statistics is the part of the government that collects data. So you can see here on the left, the Office for National Statistics has collected data on the number of deaths from COVID-19. And they will then display that on their website. You can go to the Office for National Statistics website incredibly easily and you can find data very quickly. And so that data is then communicated to the media and to the general public. You can also have data on education, obviously, and we use this data in the education unit. So this is for people aged 16 to 24, not in education, employment or training, as a percentage of all people aged 16 to 24. And so what you can take from this graph is that from January to March in 2011, all the way through to January to March in 2016, there was a fall in the percentage of people who left school and didn't have anything else to do. They didn't have a job or they didn't have more education or training. And so the government collects all of these different types of data, and they then publish it for anyone to use, but sociologists are really keen to then use that data. Okay, so a little summary then of what official statistics are. They are a large store of nearly always quantitative data, official statistics. It's nearly always quant. It's worth just emphasising here, when I say a large store, I mean an incredibly large store of data. So if just for the school that you attend, for the Bridge Academy, the amount of data that the government has on us would blow your mind. And it would go back all the way to the start of the Bridge Academy. So it would be attendance, it would be GCSE grades, it would be the ethnicity of students here, it would be the gender balance of students here. A huge amount of data just on our school. And that's just schools. So the government has an enormous store of data on huge ranges of issues all throughout society. Now, this is collected and collated by the government or by official bodies like schools. Charities can also contribute official statistics, which the government can then use and can collate and can present in a neat way like we just saw in those graphs. Birth rates, death rates, marital status, so that's whether people are married or not, crime rates. These are good examples of the kind of data that the government regularly collects in huge numbers. Okay, so let's move to look at some of the practical strengths and limitations. So practical strengths, well, straight away, we've got a wonderful strength here, which is that it's free and it's easy to access. You could pause this video right now and you could go and you can type into Google Office for National Statistics or just ONS, and you can go and browse a huge range of data and you won't have to pay anything. And you can download that data and you can use that data however you wish. You can publish it in your own report. So it's incredibly easy to access and there is no cost. It's a massive source of data, as we've just said. Now, the census is the best example of this. In the first year of each decade, so 1981, 1991, 2001, 2011, 2021, you have the census. The census is a questionnaire. It's a self-completion questionnaire, which is sent to every household in the country. Yes, every single house in the country. And that household has to fill out, by law, you have to fill it out, you get fined if you don't, the information about your household. So it will be the number of people that live there, the religion of the people in your household, the ethnicity of the people in your household, and a range of other data, jobs, things like that. And so the government possesses this enormous bank of data on every single house in the country, and it collects that every 10 years. So you can often see referred to the census of 2011 stated that X number of people were religious. When we have a census next year in 2021, we will be able to say, look, there has been probably a big drop in the number of people that are religious. So the government can compel collection. The government is actually able to say, you must fill this in, you must do this. Every single one of you has been registered at birth, and that's because you have to be registered at birth. It's illegal to not be. So we don't have this problem that we have with questionnaires and interviews where people don't turn up or they can't be bothered to fill it out, because the government can make you fill it out. You can compare between social groups. This is one of the great practical strengths. Because you've got this wide-ranging data, and because you often have data on, for example, people's social class, you can start to then say, okay, how are kids on free school meals doing compared to kids who are not on free school meals? How are Black Caribbean boys doing compared to Black Caribbean girls when it comes to GCSEs? And you can start to make those really interesting comparisons. And that's only because you have got this massive source of data that is divided up by social group. Showing trends and patterns over time. So official statistics have been gathered for decades now. And you are able to go back in time and say, well, look, what was the situation with GCSE results 5 years ago? And what's the situation with GCSE results now? And why might that have happened? How is that trend changing? A classic trend that we look at in education is the gender gap. So why has the gender gap managed to persist? Essentially, girls keep on doing better than boys again and again and again. That's a really interesting trend and pattern, and we can only study it because the official statistics have been collected. So practical weaknesses, why is it difficult to use official statistics? Well, the government collects the data in a format that it wants. not on the topic that the sociologist wants. Now, Durkheim found this problem. He found that the French government had not collected the religion of the people that had committed suicide, and so he had to use other methods of trying to work that out. And this is a problem that sociologists can encounter. They want data on something, but the government actually doesn't collect it. So a good example here would be things like literacy. If you want to know reading ages of students, official statistics will not help you. You will have to go to individual schools to ask for reading ages of students. There's no set standardised way that the government collects that kind of data. Definitions used by the state. Now, they may be different to the ones used by the sociologist. If we get a Marxist and a functionalist in the room, they are not going to agree on what the word class means. The Marxist is going to say that it's about ownership of property, about ownership of capital, owning a business. And the functionalist is just not going to use those kinds of terms. He might even reject the idea of class altogether and say that it's a meritocracy anyway. So the definitions being used by the state, they might not match your own definitions as a sociologist. And the biggest problem here with definitions is actually that they change over time. As it says in the textbook here, unemployment, the official definition of unemployment, which you would think would be a relatively simple definition, actually changed 30 times during the 80s and the 90s. And this is because governments want lower unemployment rates. It's one of the key statistics that is used in the media to justify your government. And so if you can change the definition to have less unemployment, then governments will try to do that. Progress 8 was the other good example of definitions being changed. So we moved in GCSEs from letters, A, B, C, D, E, to numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And what this means is it's really hard to compare your GCSE results with somebody's GCSE results from 10 years ago, because although a 9 might seem like an A star, an 8 is also an A star. So how many A stars were there last year? Well, you can't say that. You can only say how many 8s and 9s there were. That's a practical problem. That makes those comparisons very hard to make. Okay, now on to our ethical strengths and limitations. So are official statistics moral? Are they a good method to use? Well, there's huge advantages here. The primary data collection has to meet strict government guidelines around confidentiality and privacy. So attendance data in schools. We don't share your attendance data with anybody. We send that data straight off to the government, and we would be breaking the law if we shared that data with people outside of our organisation. When things like crime surveys are conducted or when the police take in data, there are strict guidelines on how to do it to ensure people's privacy. So there's not very much risk here because the government have that locked down. There's no harm because it's a secondary method. The government collects this data in a moral way, in a strict way with clear guidelines, and so you as a sociologist are not anywhere near harming the participant because you actually aren't going anywhere near the participant, and you know that that data was collected originally in a strict guideline way. You can also take official statistics and use them to help reduce inequality. So I gave a good example there of Black Caribbean boys versus Black Caribbean girls. Now there's a big difference in their attainment. Black Caribbean girls do much better than Black Caribbean boys. And if you know that, you can then start to think, right, well actually our intervention here is not for Black Caribbean students. Our intervention may just be for Black Caribbean boys. Or it may be to say, well, what is making Black Caribbean girls successful? Let's discover what that is, rather than simply saying there is a problem of attainment within this one ethnic group. So the only way you can make those kinds of decisions is if you're using official statistics. So they can direct you towards ethical research where you're trying to help disadvantaged groups. Okay, ethical disadvantages. So why might it be immoral to use official statistics? Why might it be wrong? Well, official statistics reflect the interests, definitions, and values of the ruling class. This is obviously what Marxists and to an extent feminists would say, that the dominant definitions being used are there because powerful people have put them there. We just saw how the government tweaks and fiddles with unemployment figures to justify itself. And so all official statistics, you could argue, are there to prop up and to back up the ruling class. Let's think about things like truancy to school. Well, the reason why we have attendance data, you could argue, is to watch people to make sure that they do attend school, and if they don't, to then fine them. And so that's because the ruling class believes that going to school is essential. Feminists would say that you're backing up a patriarchal system. So as we'll just see in a minute, data on domestic violence is not particularly accurate. And the way it's collected helps to justify the sexist patriarchal system that we have by making domestic violence seem like less of an issue than it really is. And Foucault, as you will come to in your theory section, he would argue that official statistics are a way of watching us. Now, he doesn't call it watching, he calls it surveillance. If you are being watched, you are being controlled. And official statistics are gathered on just about every day, every part of life, from what we buy when we go to the shops, to what school we go to when we have contact with the police or social services, to which hospitals we use, to our health records. All of this is a way, Foucault argues, of watching us. And the more the government knows about us, the more it can control us and can manage our behaviour. Okay, let's have a look at the theoretical strengths and limitations now. So this is validity, reliability and representativeness, and we're going to start with reliability. So reliability, remember, is the extent to which we can repeat our method and get the same or similar results. Now, this is one of the biggest strengths of official statistics. They are incredibly practical, they are incredibly ethical, but they are incredibly reliable. They really are close to the top of the tree for reliability. Now, why is that? Well, they are compiled in a standardised way by trained staff following set procedures. We don't invent how to monitor your attendance. Every single time a student doesn't attend, we don't say, oh, well, how are we going to put that into our system? Should we use an N this time, or should we use an O this time, or should we use a B this time? We use an N, and that's because that is the agreed code, and it is standardised. It's the same every single time. So what that means is that attendance data is reliable. It is compiled in the same way each time, and it gets the same or similar results. And so anyone collating this data can do it in the same or similar way. When you have a new teacher who joins the profession, it's very simple. You give a dash if they're in, you give an N if they're not. And so it can be repeated again and again and again. And so that means that you can be confident that the repeatability of official statistics is very, very high. The same would go for police data and police stats. There are set ways of recording certain crimes. And so that means that you can be confident that each police officer is entering that data in the same or similar way. Now, there are some negatives for reliability. They're not particularly strong negatives, though. There could be errors. So it's possible that it's not being entered in the same or similar way because a teacher could make an error, a police officer could make an error, a doctor could make an error. With the census, people might actually answer in the wrong box, would be a good example. So if you answer your ethnicity in the box for your religion, then that means that it's not a reliable questionnaire because it's not actually, you wouldn't be able to repeat it because it's damaged by the fact that individuals make mistakes. However, I would say here that not many people make mistakes on the census. It would be a minority. Okay, validity. Now, strengths for validity. I would say here that there are limited strengths for validity, and there's going to be a lot more weaknesses. Let's have a look at some of the strengths. So hard statistics, like birth, death, marriage, GCSE grades, what we mean here is statistics that are either on or off. They're either yes or no. It either happened or it didn't. These can actually provide a true picture of reality. So you're either born or you're not. There's either a birth certificate or there's not. And sadly, you're either dead or you're not. There's either a death certificate or there is not. There's either a marriage certificate or there is not. Your GCSE grades are your GCSE grades, whether you like them or not. And so these are hard statistics. And so official statistics can give us some truth. It is, however, limited in its scope, but nonetheless, it is valid data. It is true. It is a true picture of reality. However, and we're going to look at a lot more negatives here, and some of these are really interesting, difficult sociological points. Start with our first one. Human beings are complex. Our experience cannot be reduced to quantitative data. Imagine trying to express yourself using percentages. How intelligent are you? 60%? 70%? How much do you love your family? 85%? It doesn't make any sense, does it? You cannot reduce your complexity, you as a human being, your beliefs, your ideas, your fears, your hopes, down to numbers. And so what the interpretivists say is that with official statistics, what you're basically doing is taking human experience and trying to put a number onto it. What you end up with is something that is not true. It is not a true reflection of reality. So if we tried to say what percentage of people were the victim of mugging as a crime, by putting a number on it, all we're going to do is come up with a number that we've invented. It's a social construction, and we're not going to say anything truthful about mugging. Nothing deep and rich and interesting or complex. Soft statistics are a big problem for OS, for certain types of OS at least. So a soft statistic is when you have a dark figure. And what we mean by that is that there are unreported incidents or figures within that data set. Remember, with our hard statistics, you're either born or you're not. So we're pretty sure that that's going to be correct. It's going to be valid. But with soft statistics, there is doubt over whether we have caught all of the incidents. This is easy to understand if you think of an example. Domestic violence. Now, sadly, domestic violence is drastically underreported. The sad reality is that people will suffer domestic violence for weeks, months, years before reporting it, if they report it at all. This can be because they fear repercussions if they do report it. This can be because they love their partner and they don't actually want their partner to go to prison. This could be because they want to protect their children. A myriad of different reasons why it goes unreported. So if the government gives you data on how many incidents of domestic violence there are, you would say, no, I'm sorry, that's a soft statistic. The dark figure, the figure that we cannot see because it's in the dark, is much larger than that. And so there have been various estimates here, but we think that the real rates of domestic violence are probably at least double what the government gives to us. Again, it's very, very hard to actually find out the truth as to how many incidents of domestic violence there really are. So it lacks validity for that reason, because we can't understand the truth. Statistics are social constructs created by those in power. So a social construct, just focus on that word for a second. Social construct, it means to be built, to be constructed by society, social. So it has been built by us. We have made the statistics. The point here is that we are using labels all the time to describe our experiences. Labels like unemployment. But unemployment is a social construct. We have invented that label. Think about your name. Is your name really your name? Or is it just something that other people use to describe you? Your name can be changed like that, because it's just a social construct. We have invented it and used it in relation to you. It's not actually your name. It's just a label that we use for you. You don't have a name. We just have an agreed name that we currently use for you. Now, statistics are just like your name. They are an agreed label for the way that we're going to talk about crime, for the way that we're going to talk about domestic violence. And so they don't actually get to the truth of you. They don't actually get to the truth of human beings and how they think and how they feel and how they live. This is what labelling theorists would argue, and they would say that the only way you get beyond these social constructs is by going and talking to people, and that's why the interpretivists are often labelling theorists. Marxists would argue that OS lack validity because the state, the capitalist state, dukes the stats, and what we mean here is they fiddle with the stats, they change and tweak the stats to make themselves look better. We've already seen an example with unemployment, but the other good example here given in the textbook is demonstrations. So whenever there's a demonstration against the government, the first thing that comes out will be official statistics, normally from the police, and there's accusations that it underestimates how many people were actually on that demonstration. The Iraq War demonstration, which I think was in 2002, 2003 maybe, was said by the police at the time to have about 500,000 people. Most people now estimate it to have had at least 1 million people. And so what Marxists say is that the government deliberately underplays things like unemployment and deliberately underplays things like demonstrations or protests. Okay, representativeness. Now, OS is super representative. They're really representative, and it should be relatively obvious. Why? Remember, we get representativeness when our sample reflects the wider population. So the people that we're studying, they are similar to everybody else in society. The best thing for representativeness is just to have a massive sample. So we wouldn't have to worry about representativeness if we could study everyone in society. And so with official statistics, we can sometimes study everyone in society, like the census. So we have absolutely enormous sample sizes. And no sociologist could ever hope to interview 1 million people, but the government can. And the government can use sophisticated sample frames. So what the government can do with this huge pool of data is we can say, right, we want the GCSE grades for every single white working class boy, please. And you can get it like that. You can literally go onto the Office for National Statistics and you can pull that data up. And you can have 1999, 2000, 2001, all the way up to today. And you can see the average grade for that group. And so it's incredibly representative because sometimes we actually have every single person who's in that group in our data set. GCSE grades broken down by ethnicity, gender and class, exactly. So representativeness in terms of negatives, well, there's not many here. The British Crime Survey is more like an interview kind of technique that the government uses to try and deal with the dark figure, actually. They will only survey a small section of the population, and some people argue that it's not representative of the whole of the UK. This is for reasons like the only people that agree to do the survey are the kind of people, are a certain type of people, maybe people who are less likely to have been victim of serious crimes, maybe people who have more free time. Okay, and so finally, positivist versus interpretivist and exam questions. So let's have a look at positivist versus interpretivist. Well, this is a positivist dream. Official statistics are where it all started with Comte and Durkheim. Sociology was just official statistics initially, and it was just positivist. Why? Well, it's reliable. We've mentioned already, it's incredibly repeatable, it's standardized and can keep on, that data can be collected in the same or similar way. It shows macro trends. Remember here, the positivists like a macro perspective. They want to study millions of people to try and work out the laws that govern their behaviour. And so any method that gives us massive sample sizes and huge macro trends will be a positivist method. Quantitative data, as we know, has its connections with science, and so because OS tend to gather quantitative data, they are seen as scientific, and that's what positivists believe sociology should be. Finally, a couple of exam questions. So, outline and explain 2 strengths of using OS in sociological research. I would go for practical here, and I would go for either representativeness or reliability. And all you would have to do is then just talk through those and explain in detail why they are strengths using some examples. Then evaluate the strengths of using OS in sociological research. Now here what you need to do, because you're evaluating the strengths, you would need to do the same structure of practical, ethical, theoretical, but make sure you focus on the strengths. And then when you're evaluating the strengths, you would say this strength, however, is offset by this weakness, or this strength is not as significant because there is this problem with it. So representativeness is a great advantage for all of the reasons discussed. However, the British Crime Survey may lack representativeness because it has a small sample size. That kind of paragraph structure. Okay, I hope that was really helpful.